So we are live. So,
Ooh.
so hello everyone. This is Carlos again for another Evolve Talks, and today I have the honor to be joined by Ben, the Pfeiffer Key, who's an Evolve ambassador and someone that I came across on LinkedIn. Has been posting really interesting content about equity, diversity, and inclusion and belonging, if I'm not mistaken. So Ben, perhaps we could start with a quick introduction. Tell us about yourself. You know, who are you and what you've been doing in the
Wow.
past? How
Big
did we
question.
get here?
I know, right? Where do we start with that? So yeah, I'm Ben to Pfeiffer Key. I am now a diversity and inclusion consultant. I've spent the last 20 years in HR. More broadly speaking, I started off my career in Australia, in Sydney, working with companies on their employee engagement surveys, really helping them to articulate the sentiment of their employees and identifying opportunities for improvement. I then moved into recruiting when I came back. Completely fell into it, I think, as many recruiters do, and worked broadly across the industry, but I was recruiting for HR professionals, predominantly in the media and the retail industry, which kind of really sparked my interest. And I moved in-house into the fashion industry back in 2014, which was something that I think really aligned to my ways of working. You know, in sales, I'm not a salesman. I'm not driven by money. That was something that when I was training as a recruiter, it was something that the trainers that kept saying, they're like, we don't know what motivates you. And I now know that was relationship building and kind of connecting people and giving talent the opportunity to be successful. I'd studied a psychology degree at uni, and that I think really piqued my interest in human behavior. So I made a successful career out of, in recruitment agencies. I worked for a fantastic small boutique agency specializing in e-commerce and fashion, PR, marketing, and really gave me my first kind of taste of commerce more broadly. And I've now been working with brands for the past sort of 15 years, predominantly in the luxury sector. I spent some time at Topshop. I then moved on to Net-a-Porter and the brands within the Yoox Net-a-Porter group, which gave me the opportunity to really delve deeper into the omni-channel space and brand marketing, etc. I spent some time in New York with them. And then most recently, I've been working with a group of 3 fashion brands, luxury fashion brands. And my background predominantly is in talent acquisition, but always with the lens of inclusion. So how do you create inclusive processes, remove barriers for talent, and really afford them the opportunity to be seen and included in conversations. And the last 5 years really then saw me expand into the diversity and inclusion space. I'd say it's always been part of my career. In the UK, we had Equal Opportunities, which, set some framework around the Equality Act and to how to ensure fair and equitable processes. But I think over the last 3 to 5 years, especially seeing the evolution in D&I, really gave me the lens that this is something that gave me purpose, and actually working much closer with underrepresented talent to create an environment where they feel included, where they feel that they can belong. I think ultimately the B in DEIB is the piece that is the outcome, is that sense of belonging somewhere, which is a fundamental human need. So yeah, my work now works with organizations on creating inclusive workplaces, accessible workplaces. And then alongside that, I'm also a transformational coach. Because what underpins my viewpoint on DEI is you can have all the intention in the world, you can build all the programming, the strategies that enable opportunities for that. But if you haven't got leadership that is creating the space that is safe, that demonstrates that they are thinking inclusively through their own behaviors, they won't necessarily succeed and the progress won't be as effective as it could be. So I work with leaders to create self-reflection moments, opportunities for self-discovery in their leadership style, who they are, why they are, which then enables them to advocate for themselves, but also for others in organizations. So yeah, that's a whistle-stop tour. I'm based in London. In terms of my identity, I'm a gay man. I was born in London. My family heritage is actually from Croatia and Austria. So my grandparents were refugees after the war. So my mother moved here in the 1950s. So a cultural background that isn't necessarily purely English, although I was born in London. And in 2020, I was diagnosed with ADHD, which really gave me a bit more of a reflective moment myself to go, what gets in the way of me delivering my best? And how can I manage my symptoms and advocate for myself and ensure I'm getting the support I need? So yeah, that's kind of me.
Lovely. Thank you. Can we then talk about self-reflection, finding your identity, and going maybe perhaps diving a little deeper? I find it very interesting. I think I'm also on a personal quest to, I think this personal development is a topic that I really love talking about and understanding who we are and why are we here and why we do what we do. So how can we express ourselves so then we are not just driven by the first shiny thing that comes across, which is typically money. For some people like yourself, it's not money. So what was your process like to like how did you start your self development, personal development process? Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so I was it was in 2020 actually, and I was going through some treatment for what was diagnosed as complex post-traumatic stress from a number of different things that had happened in my life, which I hadn't really had the chance to sit back and go, okay, wow, that's actually impacted me. So that was the first point that I kind of realized that there was I guess, a historical impact that my life has had on me that had made me behave in a certain way. And at the time, it was manifesting quite visibly, quite physically in my body. So I was having a lot of triggers, a lot of traumatic episodes that I think gave me a cause for real concern over why I was behaving a certain way. So I spent some time getting a diagnosis and treatment. Alongside that, they said, look, you may also benefit from being diagnosed with or being assessed for ADHD. And at the time, it was around between a 3 and 7 year waiting list to get that diagnosis. I luckily had my private medical, which gave me that a lot quicker. And it was really the first time that I kind of went, right, okay, I think differently. My brain works differently. How I am showing up is a result of my neurodevelopment and my neurodivergence. So actually really having to understand what that meant and going through a kind of a journey of discovery, grieving, what if I didn't have it? What could I have done if I'd known earlier? How do I perform best? When do I know when my symptoms are sabotaging me? So that I can then have a language to really be able to communicate with it and articulate it more broadly. So that was, I guess, one journey I went on. The other was in 2020 as well, when George Floyd was murdered, and a real reflection from my side that I knew very little about the experience of people of color, and actually could have done more to support people in my network that were more directly impacted. But it did lead me to kind of reflect on, equity, barriers, privilege, and kind of the opportunities that I've been afforded that maybe others hadn't, but equally opportunities that maybe I've been overlooked for because of my sexual orientation or my performance in an interview with my ADHD, which at the time was undiagnosed. So there are a few things that kind of played into me going, actually, what does this mean for me? And how can I use it as a way to help others and kind of forge it into more of a purpose going forward?
And from that moment, I mean, because I think you said something quite interesting about being able to communicate, put that in words to whoever you're working with. Say, hey, this is what triggers me, and then you understand that, and then you can talk about that in the workplace. And then tell me about that, because that is also a process. You had to talk about that with your, what do you call in English, your bosses, or and how do you see that? Did they took on well, like, and or
it was I would say it was a journey for everyone involved in that. It was brand new to me. I would say it was brand new to them. I look back on, I think, how I was at that time, having just been diagnosed, and probably had a sense of entitlement that I deserved to be treated differently. So I think I definitely, in that state of emotion of grieving, confusion, relief, probably didn't necessarily communicate it in the most effective way. But we all found, I guess, found a way to communicate actually what did I need and how can they support. But I would say that from my experience then in more broader work, working with organizations to make sure they're accessible, I think businesses need help with it. They don't have the answers. And I think, building in reasonable adjustment processes needs work and needs experience and takes time. Occupational health, I think, I had one occupational health assessment to help me understand what I needed in the workplace, that actually left me walking away feeling like there was something wrong. I was asked about how much alcohol I drank. I was asked about my sleeping patterns. Do I do drugs? All these questions that were just completely irrelevant to me being able to deliver my job and actually what the purpose of the conversation was. So I think the system behind it really needed help to be able to give me that support. But as time went on, I had some ADHD coaching. I started medication. I did find I was having to manage it more myself than I guess necessarily having support to the depth I needed, which is no one's fault. It was just a reality of of where the businesses that I worked for were at the time. But there was a real commitment to help and do better. But there were definitely conversations that I didn't show up the best because I was frustrated and desperate for help. And I think there was almost a more of a collaboration and a partnership that probably could have worked.
Sure. And what's having ADHD like? What are the symptoms? I'm sorry, I have no idea.
It manifests differently in everyone. How it manifests in me is not how it manifests in one of my best friends who was diagnosed around the same time. And that we were actually at an event earlier in the year with a wonderful podcast called ADHD as Females. And in a room full of people with ADHD was the first time I'd kind of gone, okay, wow, this is how I am here. This is what is happening for me, but this is not what's happening for them over there. This is not what's happening for them over there. So that manifests completely differently. So I'll talk to my experience. My full diagnosis is I have mild to moderate ADHD. I have comorbidities of anxiety and depression. And I also have OCD, which doesn't manifest in obsessive cleaning as much as I'm sure my boyfriend would love me to be more on top of the dishes and stuff. But it kind of manifests in obsessive thinking. So for me, the symptoms range from real emotional highs and lows. I take things very personally. There's one specific symptom called projection sensitive dysphoria, which is unique to people with ADHD, where when you have any perceived or real rejection, it really creates this very emotional response in your body, and a heightened level of rejection, essentially. That manifested in me quite highly. The restlessness, so I have a combined type. So I have the impulsivity and the hyperactivity. So, money problems. I spend money on things I don't need to spend money on. I mean, this is very general as well. That it goes a lot deeper than that. Hyperactivity, getting me to sit still is quite hard. I need to move around a lot. Exercise has become a necessity for me. On the other side of it, it manifests in the way that I'm incredibly creative and I'm incredibly solutions driven. So if a problem's presented to me, I am able to find a solution and bring alternative ways of thinking. And that is something with the medication I've learned, actually, it is one of my strengths. I'm a very strategic thinker. I'm a very collaborative business partner. When I have the medication, I lose some of that ability, which is why I'm kind of now weaning myself off the medication a bit. I've had medical guidance on that. So if anyone's going through something similar, I've been having support for that. Other things like insomnia, I slept probably more than 5 hours a night for the last 15 years. So yeah, it manifests very differently in me.
It's interesting because I can relate to a lot of what you're sharing, especially the highs and lows. And anxiety is something that happens a lot in my life. We'll talk about this sometime, but I married again, and she's in Brazil. We're planning if she moves to Denmark or if she goes to Ireland, then we're going to be on and off. She also has 2 kids. And there was an event happening here on the weekend, on Saturday, because the Christmas lights were going on. So it was a big event here in the city of Odense in Denmark. And the place was packed, like beautiful, everybody, all the children there, my kids, they were there as well. But then all of a sudden I started having this mini panic attack. I was thinking a lot, especially with the manifestations, the demonstrations that we are having, Palestine and all of that. And I was just like, this is the perfect scenario for something really bad to happen, and then I shared that with her because I said, that's how I'm feeling. My kids are here and I don't want to freak out. So I need to breathe a bit. And, the police they were there, but I was building that in my mind, that whole scenario. And I understand when that happens more so now, but it's still sometimes it's a bit hard. So I have to talk about that, and it's good that she's more calm than I am. And then she's like, okay, if this happened, then how about if we do this, this, and that? And she played another scenario. I was like, okay, great. That makes sense. So I have anxiety. I don't take medication. I try to meditate. That's something I do. I learned TM 4 years ago, and I still practice, which helped me a lot. And exercise also helps quite a bit, right? But the insomnia, or sleeping 5 hours and not really getting to the to the deep sleep, it's always a bit light, right? Yeah. So, oh man, and then if you drink, it just gets worse because you don't really sleep, right? So
no, exactly.
I relate to I can relate to a lot of what you're sharing. But let's talk then about your journey, because I think our challenges and when we really dive deep into our challenges, it's probably the challenges of many other people out there, right? And so, since you understand more of yourself now, how are you like expecting to help other people in the diversity and inclusion topic, and maybe ADHD as well,
Yeah, absolutely.
and
So
companies, right? And companies, yeah.
yeah, and as individuals as well. I think, when I first started doing this work, it was before the pandemic. It was, I started getting more heavily involved in sort of 2018, which is a lot around awareness, firstly, and actually helping people to identify that there are systemic barriers that are holding people back. Very light touch stuff, unconscious bias training, celebrating key moments in the calendar, things like that. But really now it's given me a perspective where I am able to actually manage my own biases a bit better. But don't get me wrong, we all have them, they still show up. But I'm able to kind of acknowledge and actually reflect on where they come from. So when something is happening, or someone is going through something, I guess I'm now more able to bring a curiosity and a level of empathy that maybe I wouldn't be able to have if I wasn't doing this day in, day out. What I am very conscious of is ensuring and noticing when there is a disparity or there is an exclusion happening, and really try and understand the impact that has on someone. And how can we help others to minimize that impact? I think a lot of the space in DEI has been focused on intention, and actually whether you have a positive intention, brilliant, but you still have an impact. So helping people to really understand the impact that something has, and how to mitigate that risk more in a more empathetic, human way, and actually say, what, I'm really sorry I hurt you, or I said the wrong thing. Help me understand what I can do differently next time. So I think my experience has given me just a different perspective, a lived experience that I didn't understand before. I can now articulate why I am in a certain place in my life and what's got me here, which then helps me go, actually, maybe that's happening for someone else over here. So being able to say something more could be going on, and having, I guess, a more vulnerable conversation with people. But that comes with trust, that comes with creating psychological safety, that comes with yourself. You open yourself up to criticism, you open yourself up to rejection again, or whatever it might be. But I think a lot of organizations, and having, my experience of where organizations are, and especially leaders, they don't know what they don't know. So helping leaders and organizations to actually accept where they are in their own journey, and then help them, meet them where they are, and actually listen, I think has really given, that's something that I've been really passionate about doing, is actually listening to people, not pointing blame, not shaming anyone, really helping people in a way that makes them feel safe. And there was an analogy that a friend of mine gave me recently around, and I'm not going to get this right at all, but you'll get the nuts and bolts of it. But you've got the sun and the wind, and there's a man in his jacket, and both the sun and the wind are trying to take the man's jacket off. Now the wind goes in really hard and blows, tries to blow the jacket off, but that just makes the man hold it tighter. Whereas the sun just very gently heats him up, gets him warm, makes him feel comfortable, and then he just takes it off by himself. And that was a really powerful image for me. And part of why I believe in that approach is it creates more sustainable engagement, more sustainable change. And it reduces the risk of people getting defensive. I think a lot of people are scared to say anything. There's definitely a nervousness around DEI. I saw some stats at the weekend that I think it was 26% of employees find talking about it very uncomfortable. So we need, and that 26% are the ones that we need to help. to really feel comfortable talking about it.
But I think to your point there, and I think people are afraid. I mean, the world, the way the world is going today, it's extremely polarized, right? We have two wars happening at the same time, maybe, and I think social media just amplifies that. And when it comes to your topic, I mean, I'm afraid of being bashed on the internet, like after I create a mini video, as I always do, because maybe I spoke something wrong. And for the record, English is a second language, so I have to think even more, when we're having a conversation. And so it's a very sensitive society that we are in today, isn't it? And people are, maybe they have good intentions, as you said, or the best intentions, but they are also afraid of speaking up. And yes, we all have biases. I come from Brazil, and I mean, there's a certain profile of person that you would see typically crossing the street and said, I'm going to cross the street because I don't want to be on this side of the street. And so those are life experiences that affect us, right? And they come to the workplace as well. And so I think what you're doing is really interesting, but it's I would love to talk about your challenges. How do you see that in the workplace, moving forward?
I think, if I'm being honest, I think DEI is in a really interesting point. I think we've now had sort of 3 years of really intense focus. And I think quite rightly at the time, especially around anti-racism and, Black Lives Matter movement and all of the work that went around supporting people of color, especially into the workplace. I feel like from my conversations, there's this real sense of fatigue now not with diversity and inclusion generally, but actually I think businesses are now taking a bit of a step back and going, what are we doing? And actually, what have we done? And where is the progress? Where are we seeing that change? And where are we actually seeing that impact? And I think businesses are now taking a bit of a pause and having to reflect on what does this actually mean for us as an organization? Does it make sense to do? You can't do everything well. You can focus on different elements of diversity and inclusion. We're all diverse. Every single one of us is diverse. It's that inclusion bit that's the important thing. I think businesses are having to take stock and actually go, have we made progress? Yes, great. What can we do then? Have we made progress? No. Why not? And what can we do to kind of move it forward? So I think there is an interesting point for us in the industry now of everyone's exhausted. It's very long work. You do feel like you are sometimes the only one talking about it. Equally, you take on a lot of stuff from other people, and I remember when I first started doing DEI more kind of permanently and full time, someone did ask me that question of, what does self-care look like to you? No one's ever asked me that question before. And it's something that stuck with me because, you do take on a lot. And to your point, you're nervous about sharing things. I think as long as your intention is positive, you got data to support it, or your own lived experience being a data point. That I'm not talking about necessarily numbers, but actually, your data is your experience is your data. I think you have to really just you have to prepare yourself, I think, for both the positives and the negatives, because you're sharing an opinion, you're sharing your experience, which is not someone else's experience or opinion. You're going to come across, I think, backlash, but as long as you can support yourself and back yourself up, I've definitely learning that's the thing that I need to sometimes focus more on than, did I upset that person? Let me fix that, but actually let me look at the reality of what happened and is it rational? If that answers your question. I feel like I just waffled.
Yeah. No, it does. But then the next question, because for me, it's like, where does then meritocracy make sense? Let me try to explain myself, because I think it's really cool that companies want to say, okay, we need to employ people from certain races, but then where is meritocracy there? And besides meritocracy, I mean, in terms of diversity and inclusion, shouldn't you be hiring also an older person in their 50s or 60s, because they also are full of experience, right? So more in that sense, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And I think this is I think the part where I think a lot of businesses need help is actually being able to articulate what they need, and actually how can they become more diverse in their workforce. The data itself, it speaks for itself in terms of the impact on commercials. Businesses that are ethically diverse are 35% more commercially successful. We talk now a lot around customer data, and actually customers are more likely to stay with a business that is showing a true commitment to diversity and inclusion. I believe the number is around 27% are more loyal. But there was another report that came out the other week that said that 40% of retail customers will shift 10% of their business away from a company that isn't demonstrating DEI, which I think was quite a staggering figure. Employee retention, 72% of employees want to stay for a company that is really focusing on this as a priority, and especially for the generation that is coming up into the workforce now that are the future leaders. I do get sometimes frustrated with leaders who are really critical of Gen Z, especially, their behaviors, their way of wanting to work. LinkedIn did a poll recently that showed they are the most committed workforce generation at the moment, looking to get, they're ambitious, they want to get into a company, they want a career paths just changed. So I think leaders need to almost lean into that a bit more and help them to be the future of their organizations. And I think there's a real need for businesses to understand the makeup of their organizations more, to be able to say, well, actually, in this pocket of our business, we need to bring in a different generation of talent that then reflects our customer base, or whether it's ethnic diversity or gender diversity, or actually supporting people with disabilities, neurodiversity, that bring in strengths to an organization, to understand actually where they can fit and where can they bring those strengths into the business, I think is really, really critical. I think that Glassdoor did a report that shared around 70% of candidates looking for jobs now want to work for organizations that are truly committed to this. So there is a definite link through to DEI commitments more directly. But I think listening to your organization, really understanding who they are, to then tailor where you can balance representation, where you can bring in different perspectives. Because it won't be blanket across an organization, it won't be blanket across a location, it will be really differing depending on the team. But in order to do that, I really believe that leaders and managers need the support to talk about meritocracy that then removes the risk of that human decision making and that human bias still to play into it. You can create a reasonable adjustment process that supports someone with a disability or neurodivergence, for example, coming into the organization. But how do I ensure that then doesn't impact the decision that's being made around promotions? We talk about it a lot with especially with mothers taking time off to raise their children. How can we ensure that there is equity in someone's experience of leaving a business to raise a family and come back in and be treated fairly in the right way? And I think a lot of the time businesses and managers don't have the tools in order to do that effectively and ensure that, presenteeism in hybrid working. Am I promoting the person that's just comes into the office more, that I see more, rather than someone in a different location? Is there anything else making my decision biased and inequitable? So I think that is where I think a lot of the work now needs to do is actually help managers on that journey to be able to say, I'm confident in that decision that I made.
And Ben, yes, Do you have a framework that you offer companies, or is it typically a one-to-one conversation, or one-to-many kind of one-to-few, sorry, conversation that you have with managers when we are talking about companies and you're coaching or advising?
Yeah. I've done it. I mean, I've done it both ways. I've created frameworks. I've created policies. I've done training until I can't stand the sound of my own voice. But then you have to bring it down to the individual, and actually, how do you make it relevant to them, and make it relevant not just to them but their world. So I think frameworks are great if you are giving the support behind it, but equally, I think the big, some of the conversations I've been having recently are around accountability, and how do you really ensure leaders are being held accountable for the decisions they're making, for driving inclusivity, for driving equitable decisions and hiring, or promotion or development, or however it might be. So I think that is the next step for many companies. Is actually, we've talked about this a lot. We're now ready to make a more of a commitment to holding you accountable in a positive way. Like I said, I don't believe in finger pointing or pointing, and shaming or all of that. But I think you can do it in a way that actually helps people understand their role and the impact that they can have in creating a more equitable workplace. So yeah, a lot of the work I do kind of balances, I would say, both. Equally, it depends on the organization. What I do for one organization here is not what this organization over here needs. Some are at their very early stages of diversity. They've been able to say, actually, we can't think about this right now. Let's park it. Let's think about it a little bit when we're ready. Others have gone leaps and bounds ahead and probably are now having to go, actually, whoa, let's just take a bit of a step back. There's no right or wrong. I think it's just the support that you need.
Yeah. So in your career working for, because you worked for some quite international companies there, what was the biggest challenge that the leaders you work with faced when they had to recruit people? And I mean, you were in the front lines there, right? Recruiting talent yourself as well. So
yeah, I think it would come back to that real support for defining what they need in that search initially. For example, when I would be very early in 2020, January 2020, I just delivered some workshops around thinking about what different perspectives you can bring in. How can you source talent? How can you identify what you're missing in the gaps in order to then kind of take an opportunity when a role is vacant to bring in some diverse perspective? Unfortunately, we then went into a pandemic, which meant that realistically, we couldn't implement a lot of it until much later. But that gave a framework really for leaders to start thinking about it differently, and actually then going, right, how do my biases show up in a decision-making around recruiting? I think especially in the luxury and retail industries, there is this balance of, we have a brand, we have a specific value proposition, which I believe that employees and candidates need to align to. But it's how do you ensure you're attracting the diverse talent firstly, because I think a lot of the challenge is businesses just aren't even on the radar of underrepresented talent for them even to enter the pipeline. To then ensure that you are then creating that inclusive, accessible process through tools, through frameworks, and training that then ensures that an objective decision is made on who you should bring into an organization. But I think it really depends again on where you're at in your journey. And to your point around age, I think we, especially in fashion, in internships, for example, have been pretty much an exclusive route into the industry. And I think now we're seeing a much more open conversation around what is an intern in a business, and how can we ensure we are thinking more diversely and actually bringing in, without someone of privilege coming in, actually how can we ensure that we are doing a fair assessment? It's a lot in the UK I'm hearing at the moment around social mobility. and how can we ensure we are bridging the gap between those from a socio-economically underprivileged background. But each company will have a different, I guess, objective.
Brilliant. We are on to 40 minutes, and let me just see. Let me just think about this. Right. So, Ben, if you were to define diversity and inclusion in a few words, you explained quite well throughout our conversation, but if you were to give me a few words about it, how would you define this? And I want to make a really nice cut out of this question or of your answer here.
Okay, the big moment. Diversity, like I said, is everyone. We're all diverse. We all have unique strengths. We all have unique abilities. We all have, our own lived experiences. So I think for me, it's about how do you celebrate that and actually understand it firstly. So I think that's part of it. The inclusion bit for me is critical. I say a lot that there's no point in bringing in underrepresented talent or a diverse talent pool of people if you haven't got the culture that then sits behind it, that gives someone the voice, that gives someone the confidence, the safety to share their opinions, share their ideas, to be vulnerable, to challenge. So I think, that's how I see the differentiation between diversity and inclusion. You've then got the equity piece, which is around the fairness. How fair is a decision? How fair is a process? Are we removing the systemic barriers and systemic and societal behaviors, decisions, inequities that make sure that we are making decisions fairly? And then belonging really is the outcome of all of that. If you've got, a diverse workforce that feels included, that feels like they are being treated fairly, they are going to feel like they belong somewhere, which is then that fundamental human need. So I think that for me wraps it all up. This is why I focus on the belonging side as well as the DEI piece. All
right. And my final question is if you could send a message to all of the leaders, all leaders in global companies, smaller companies. The name of the company, the community that I have is Evolve, so they can evolve in the way they hire, the way they do things. What would that be? If your message would be heard? I think to really evolve, you would need, I think it comes down to that behavior and that real leadership, taking a step back and reflecting and thinking, who am I and why am I the leader I am? And what is getting in the way of me advocating for myself and someone else? I think ultimately that's where I focus a lot of my coaching work. It is around helping people on that journey of self-reflection and self-discovery. That's brilliant. Ben Pfeiffer T. I hope I pronounced it correctly. Ben, yes. Thank you so much for your time today. If people want to get to know more about you, how can they find you and your work? So I'm on LinkedIn. Yeah, LinkedIn is the biggest platform for me. My consultancy is DPK Consulting and Coaching. So dpk.consulting on Instagram. And I'm evolving my own social media presence. It's been a learn for me as well. It's been a huge growth experience for me doing this experience, stepping out on my own. So, I think you're doing great, and LinkedIn is a major platform, so I'm sure you're going to do great there. So Ben, thanks very much, and you can always count on me. Yeah, of course, man. Likewise. Thanks for having me. Sure thing. So I'll end the stream now.